46 years. That's how long a killer walked free. For nearly half a century, a grieving family waited for answers, while the man investigators suspected from the very beginning went home, raised children, celebrated holidays, and lived an ordinary life. A teenage girl vanished on what should have been one of the happiest nights of her young life. Her final words were spoken from the darkness as she was dragged away from the person who loved her most. Those words would haunt him forever. The investigation seemed to stall. The evidence appeared to lead nowhere. And a man who sat directly across from detectives and answered their questions calmly would eventually walk out the door without being charged. But this story wasn't over. Because decades later, a single piece of evidence would reveal a truth that had been hidden in plain sight all along. This is the heartbreaking true story of CARLA Jean Walker. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Cold Case 247, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing forgotten cold cases back into the spotlight and giving victims the voice they deserve. CARLA Jean Walker was 17 years old. She was young, full of dreams, and looking forward to the future. Friends described her as kind, cheerful, and intelligent. She came from a loving family in Fort Worth, Texas, and like many teenagers her age, she was beginning to discover what life had in store for her. No one could have imagined that one ordinary evening would become the final chapter of her short life. It was February. Valentine season filled the air. Young couples were celebrating, spending time together, and making memories. CARLA had plans that night with her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy. The two attended a school dance and enjoyed what should have been a normal evening together. Afterward, they decided to spend a little more time talking before heading home. Like countless teenagers before them, they parked their car near a bowling alley in Fort Worth. The area seemed quiet. There was no sign of danger. Nothing appeared unusual. Inside the vehicle, the young couple talked about life, the future, and whatever was on their minds that evening. But somewhere nearby, someone was watching. Someone was waiting. Someone had already made a decision that would destroy countless lives. The attack came suddenly. Without warning, a stranger approached the vehicle. Rodney barely had time to react. The man carried a weapon and immediately launched a violent assault. The teenager was beaten with such force that he quickly became overwhelmed. Blood splattered inside the vehicle. Pain and confusion filled the moment. Rodney tried to fight back, but he was no match for the attacker. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. The stranger grabbed CARLA. She screamed. She struggled. She fought desperately. But the attacker was stronger. As she was pulled away from the car and into the darkness, CARLA turned toward Rodney one final time. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Rodney, go get my dad." Those were the last words he would ever hear her speak. Then she disappeared into the night. When Rodney regained consciousness, CARLA was gone. The parking lot was silent. The attacker had vanished. The reality of what had happened hit him immediately. CARLA had been kidnapped. A desperate search began. Family members were notified. Police officers rushed into action. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers hoped there would still be time to find her alive. Every passing hour felt like an eternity. Investigators searched roads, fields, and remote locations throughout the area. Tips poured into the police department. People desperately wanted to believe there would be a happy ending. But deep down, many feared the worst. The waiting was unbearable. For CARLA's parents, every minute felt like torture. Their daughter had simply gone out for an evening with her boyfriend. Now she was missing. The uncertainty consumed everyone who loved her. One day passed. Then another. Then a third. And finally, the devastating discovery came. CARLA's body was found in a culvert outside Fort Worth. The scene shocked even experienced investigators. What happened to Carla during those final days was horrific. Evidence showed that she had suffered unimaginable abuse. The teenager who had dreams, plans, and a future ahead of her had endured a nightmare no human being should ever experience. The city was horrified. Residents followed every development. Parents held their children a little closer. Teenagers who once felt safe suddenly realized how quickly everything could change. For Carla's family, grief became their new reality. The young girl they loved was gone. And now all they wanted was justice. Detectives worked around the clock. The case immediately became a priority. Investigators interviewed witnesses. They examined physical evidence. They followed leads across Fort Worth and beyond. Slowly, attention began turning toward one particular individual. His name surfaced during the investigation. There were reasons to look closely at him. There were questions that needed answers. Detectives brought him in for questioning. Sitting across from investigators, the man appeared calm. He answered questions carefully. He denied any involvement in Carla's disappearance and murder. Nothing about his behavior seemed unusual. At least not on the surface. As the questioning continued, investigators remained suspicious. Something about him kept drawing their attention back. Eventually, he agreed to undergo a polygraph examination. At the time, lie detector tests were viewed very differently than they are today. Many investigators believed they could provide important insight into whether a suspect was telling the truth. The examination was conducted. Questions were asked. Responses were recorded. Then the results came back. According to the test, the suspect appeared truthful. For investigators, it was a frustrating development. Without stronger evidence, there was little they could do. The case had reached a dead end. The suspect walked away. No charges were filed. No arrest was made. And one of the most important opportunities to solve the case seemed to disappear. As months became years, public attention slowly faded. New crimes occurred. New investigations began. The headlines changed. But for Carla's family, time stood still. Every birthday was a reminder of what had been taken. Every holiday carried an empty space. Every anniversary reopened old wounds. Meanwhile, the man investigators once suspected continued living his life. He blended into society. He worked. He paid bills. He raised children. Neighbors likely saw nothing unusual about him. To many people, he appeared completely ordinary. Yet all the while, the questions remained. What happened that night? Who took Carla Walker? And why had justice not arrived? Years turned into decades. Detectives retired. Evidence was placed into storage. Witnesses aged. Some passed away. Memories faded. Many cold cases reach this point and never move beyond it. Files gather dust. Families lose hope. Answers disappear forever. But Carla Walker's case refused to die. Some investigators continued believing the truth was still hidden somewhere inside the evidence. They simply needed the right technology to uncover it. As science advanced, criminal investigations began changing dramatically. DNA evidence transformed law enforcement. Cases that once seemed impossible suddenly became solvable. Across the country, cold cases were being reopened. Murderers who believed they had escaped justice were being identified decades after their crimes. Investigators in Fort Worth watched these developments closely. They wondered whether Carla's case might someday benefit from these same advances. The possibility offered hope. But hope alone was not enough. Testing old evidence required resources. It required funding. And it required determination. Fortunately, there were people who refused to give up. Members of Carla's family continued pushing for answers. Investigators continued reviewing the case. Advocates continued raising awareness. The years kept passing. Yet somehow the case remained alive. Then something important happened. Additional attention brought renewed interest to the investigation. Funding became available for advanced forensic testing. Evidence collected decades earlier was re-examined. Scientists began applying techniques that did not exist when Carla was murdered. What once appeared impossible suddenly seemed achievable. The process required patience. Laboratory experts carefully analyzed the evidence. Investigators waited anxiously. Family members tried not to get their hopes too high. After all, they had experienced disappointment before. But this time felt different. This time science was doing what investigators in the 1970s could never have imagined. Then came the phone call. It was Independence Day. A date most people associate with celebration and fireworks. But for one investigator, it became something else entirely. The forensic laboratory had results. The evidence had finally produced a DNA profile. And that profile pointed toward a specific individual. When the detective heard the name, he immediately recognized it. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone new. It wasn't a shocking, unknown suspect. It was the same man investigators had considered decades earlier. The same man who sat across from detectives. The same man who passed a polygraph examination. The same man who walked away and spent decades living freely. After all those years, science had returned investigators to the very place where the trail had once gone cold. The breakthrough was extraordinary. At last, there was evidence strong enough to move forward. The suspect's name was Glenn Samuel McCurley. For decades, he had remained outside the reach of justice. Now that was about to change. Investigators worked carefully. Every step mattered. This case had waited far too long for mistakes. Evidence was reviewed again. Legal procedures were completed. Then authorities made their move. McCurley was arrested. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. For many people, the case had become a distant memory. For Carla's family, however, it was the moment they had been waiting for almost their entire lives. Imagine carrying grief for nearly half a century. Imagine wondering whether the person responsible would ever be identified. Imagine fearing that justice might never come. Then imagine receiving the news that an arrest had finally been made. The emotions were overwhelming. Relief, sadness, anger, hope, all mixed together. No arrest could bring Carla back. No courtroom could erase the suffering. No sentence could restore the years stolen from her family. But truth matters. Accountability matters. And after decades of uncertainty, both were finally within reach. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following this shocking story from beginning to end. As the legal process moved forward, investigators prepared to present the evidence. The case that once seemed impossible to solve was now heading toward resolution. The family watched carefully. The community watched carefully. And eventually, the moment arrived. Glenn Samuel McCurley stood before the court. The man who had spent decades avoiding responsibility now faced the consequences of his actions. The evidence was overwhelming. There was nowhere left to hide. No explanation could erase what happened. No argument could undo the truth revealed through modern forensic science. Then came the words Carla's family had waited decades to hear. McCurley pleaded guilty. After all those years, the man responsible finally admitted his role. Justice had arrived. Late. Incomplete. But real. For many cold case families, that moment never comes. Many victims remain unnamed. Many killers remain unidentified. Many investigations end without answers. Carla Walker's story was different. Her family endured decades of uncertainty, but they eventually received the truth. That truth came through persistence. It came through advances in science. And it came through the determination of people who refused to let the case disappear. There is another lesson hidden inside this story. Criminals often believe time is their ally. They assume evidence will vanish. They assume memories will fade. They assume investigators will eventually stop looking. But time can work in unexpected ways. Technology evolves. Methods improve. Evidence that once seemed meaningless becomes valuable. And sometimes the truth waits patiently until the world is finally ready to uncover it. For decades, Carla Walker's case existed as one of Fort Worth's most painful mysteries. Parents remembered her story. Investigators remembered her story. Family members lived with her story every single day. Then, nearly half a century later, science gave Carla a voice once more. It spoke from an evidence locker. It spoke through a laboratory report. And it pointed directly toward the man responsible. The outcome could never erase the tragedy. Nothing can change what happened on that Valentine's night. Nothing can return the future Carla lost. Nothing can heal every wound left behind. But justice, even delayed justice, still matters. Because every victim deserves to be remembered. Every family deserves answers. And every cold case deserves another chance. Carla Jean Walker was more than a victim. She was a daughter. A friend. A teenager with hopes and dreams. A young woman whose life should have stretched far beyond 17 years. Today, her story continues to be told because people refuse to forget her. And perhaps that is one of the most powerful forms of justice there is. The determination to remember. The refusal to give up. The commitment to seek the truth no matter how much time has passed. Thank you for watching this episode of Cold Case 247. If this case stayed with you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who follows true crime documentaries. And before you go, leave a comment telling us which moment affected you the most, the kidnapping, the decades-long wait for justice, or the DNA breakthrough that finally solved the mystery. Until next time, remember, no matter how cold a case becomes, the truth has a way of finding its way back into the light.